Look at that. I remembered all week long. It's a new record for me. Okay, so on Wednesday, we had started this conversation about what makes a species and how do we reinforce when speciation starts to occur. I'm actually going to swipe back a little bit here. So the first thing we had talked about was this, look, I changed colors, just know what I want, was this pre-zygotic business, right? So remember when we say pre-zygotic, right, these were the 5 techniques, right, that refer to before, right, pre being before, the egg and the sperm meet. So this was things like behavioral isolation, habitat isolation, all the way up to gametic isolation, right? Anything before that moment that the zygote is formed. Okay, then at the very, very end of class, we had just started talking about post-zygotic. Okay, so the other option. And remember, when we're talking about species, we can use any combination of these. And the more of these isolation techniques we're using, right, the more separate, the more isolated our 2 populations can be. So in this case, remember, post-zygotic instead of pre-zygotic, now we're post-zygotic. Okay, so this is after the egg and that sperm have met. Okay, so what can happen after the fact to help reinforce that those populations should stay separate? Okay, and so there are 3 of these, okay, but we did not get to talk about all 3 of them, or we only sort of scratched the surface and got to talk about one of them. So we're going to re-review that one, but before we do so, were there any questions about pre versus post in general, or any of the pre-zygotic type of isolation techniques? Okay, so let's look at these post-zygotics. Remember, like our shark kitten sort of implies to us, we have created some kind of zygote, right? Some kind of cellular mass, right, of sperm and egg. Okay, so the first one, the very last thing we talked about for like 5 minutes at the end of class on Wednesday was what happens if that egg and sperm had just met. Okay, but the relationship is intensely short-lived. Okay, so we call this hybrid inviability. We had a lot of new terms on this particular slide. The first of which we were talking about hybrid, which is probably a term we're very familiar with in some way or another. Okay, and so we remember we referred to this like this is the crossing of those 2 populations. This is how we get that mixed offspring. So our example that we've kind of been running with in class is if we had sort of the brown colored bugs or insects, I think they were, and well, they are now, if not, right? And then the green colored bugs, right? And they can't or were not hanging out easily because they're going to camouflage in 2 different habitats and all of that business. And so a hybrid would be if you had a green insect and a brown insect get together for one Romeo and Juliet type night, and they had an offspring. Okay, so their offspring would be that hybrid. Okay, now in this case, that offspring or that hybrid is inviable, okay, meaning it never was born. Now remember, this happens very early on, which is what we mean by arrested development. Okay, so only a handful of cells are going to go through mitosis. So we have that fusion, that fertilization of the sperm and the egg. Okay, but after that happens, usually you're only getting a handful of mitotic divisions, right? Somewhere between 10 and 100. So you're very, very teeny. Okay, so if we remember back, right, we'll brush some dust to mitosis. Remember we have all these mitotic checkpoints that say, wait, are we sure everything is all hunky-dory with what's going on here? Do we have the right number of chromosomes on either side? Is everything lined up? Does everything match? Is everything the same size? So that's what's going on here. And what ends up happening is the answer is no. Everything is not okay, right? For whatever reason. Okay? So when we've mixed, right, for example, sheep and goat, okay, wrong number of chromosomes. So as in love as our couple might be, for whatever reason, okay, mitosis is not going to be successful. It will be stopped very early on, and the cells go through apoptosis. Okay, meaning cell death or cell destruction. Okay, in the same way that if we remember talking about cell death when we had mistaken cells, tumorous cells, or any cell that's messed up. Same kind of thing here. All right, so inviability, basically an inviable or a messed up cell. And this is a relatively good version, right? Because we don't want to invest a lot of energy into cells that are not going to be healthy and successful, right? And so if we think about this through, okay, a hybrid in this case is probably not going to be as successful as either parent, right? This feel okay so far? Okay, so what happens if this doesn't happen? Okay, if we think of something like a donkey and a mule, a horse and a zebra, these are hybrids we can already picture. Okay, they're far apart that we know they're not the same thing. A horse and a zebra, definitely not the same species. Okay, but we know if they get together for a night of Romeo and Juliet, some weird stuff happens. Okay, the zorse, for example. So hybrid inviability doesn't always happen. So what else can happen? In case you've not seen a zorse. Real animal, not making that one up. Okay, uncommon, but does happen. So the next thing that can occur is called hybrid sterility. Okay, so our hybrid, right, so here we're focused on all the offspring. Here we are, right? So what happens with that baby or those cells? Okay, so in this case, okay, the cells are okay, mitosis occurs, our baby is born. Hooray! Okay? Les ours. Okay? Or a mule, right? That's a donkey and a horse together. Whatever. And there's a whole bunch of these. Horses in particular really get around. Okay, but the key here is the offspring. Okay, so we're focused on the hybrid here. So our mixed offspring for all of these have some kind of disadvantage. Okay, we can spell it, it's fine. Okay, so the disadvantage from bullet one is that they die. That's a pretty big disadvantage. Our disadvantage from bullet two is that they themselves can't breed. Often, you are correct, right? So Maria's point is they often have a much shorter lifespan, which is also true, very commonly.
Why can't they reproduce?
Usually it's because while their chromosomes or their genes have lined up well enough to allow them to live, right, they don't line up well enough to allow them to produce proper meiotic gametes. So all of their gametes end up busted and weird. Hmm? In addition, these sort of offspring are very unusual, right? They're rare. So we can't go back and mate with a zebra. We can't go back and mate with a horse, and there just aren't many zorses running around, right? Because they don't live very long. And as we'll see in the next bullet point, they don't do super great. It looks kind of sad even. Okay. So this is ultimately problematic for a lot of the evolutionary issues we've talked about, right? Remember, one of the key pieces, we had three major pieces we needed: inheritance, variation, and fitness, right? So now we can't check box that inheritance piece, right? Because I cannot pass anything on to my offspring. I can't even have offspring.
Is it also just because they're so weird to both species that no one wants them, you know? Like,
so that can happen. So this is a good question. So she asked if organisms in this condition are often rejected. That can happen, and it often depends on what their phenotype, what they look like. Most often on whether or not they're rejected by their herd or their flock or their pack. If they're very close, right, so this zorse looks very zebra-like, would probably not be rejected unless it was quite small. Rejections, like Maria is referring to, are common though, particularly in things like birds when they cross, because the coloration in birds tends to be way, way off when they mix. And birds are really hardcore about color and pattern and plumage on their feathers. And so if you don't look right, you do not belong to their flock, and they can be rejected, not fed, or literally pecked to death.
I think that case with monkeys, like, there was this case of orangutan that she was hurt, and they actually did like plastic surgery because it was a weird species and they wanted to make them, and the male killed her because he knew about she wasn't okay. So when they were mating, he like tried, and when he actually like saw her like in face, he killed him. It was a great anatomy show, but yeah.
Well, it is actually super horrifying.
It happens in natural life.
Yes, yeah. Oh, and so those are two, so there's kind of two side-by-side issues, right? Being not mated with because you don't look right, and in this case, right, even if someone were to mate with them, they still wouldn't produce anything. In this case, often these hybrids have both issues. But even if this was the sexiest looking zebra in the pack, and everybody was choosing him or her, they still would not be able to choose little, or still not be able to make little zebra babies. And as you can see as our point, right, not the best looking zebra in the bunch either. Poor thing. Not that we're body shaming the little zebra, zorse thing. Okay, our first two bullets. Clear, different, and we can see sort of our buildup of what our problem is as we mix populations. All right, so this builds us up to what we've sort of been teasing around. Okay, what we call hybrid breakdowns. Remember, we're focused on what is the disadvantage that mixed offspring that hybrid is experiencing. Okay, so the other thing that hybrid can be experiencing is what's called breakdown. Or in other words, okay, not being as good as either parent. Okay, so these are some of the things we were sort of just mentioning being problematic. I'm not the right color, right? So I might be rejected. Okay, we can kind of imagine this from our imaginary example that we've been working with, right? If I have a brown insect and a green insect come together, right, being green is really advantageous because I can hide in the leaf litter. Being brown is really advantageous because I can hide in the dirt. So those are good colors to be. But if we mix, okay, I'm going to end up with neither color very clearly. Right? We can imagine sort of this like dampened green, maybe a baby poop green. Kind of picture that. It's not a bad color to be, okay? But the problem you're going to end up with is you're not going to be super great, right, being in the leaves or being in the dirt. Okay, so that's a negative or a disadvantage, right? You're going to be weaker than either of your parents, okay, or a non-hybrid. Okay, so it's one of the examples I have here. This is another plant one. I always try to toss in a few for Dr. Watson. So I have two different strains of rice. Okay, one that grows quite tall and one that grows quite short, depending on the type of rice paddy it's planted into. Okay, and if you cross those two, right, we get that sad little thing. Okay, which is not just pathetic looking, okay, and would probably drown in any rice paddy that you planted it in, okay, but it's clearly producing less rice overall. Okay, so that's going to struggle to survive, to compete, to photosynthesize, as much as any of its other brethren, right, that would have been born of, right, just a non-hybrid set of parents. Okay, so when we say long-term genetic dead end, all we mean to say is any hybrid that's in this hybrid breakdown situation probably not going to do great. Right? So it may likely die, and if not, right, any offspring that it has are probably going to be equally disadvantageous. So they're also going to be little or sad or miscolored. Right? So the long-term issues here are going to lead to a die-off of this particular family tree. Right? This is not a great scenario. Okay. So this is the key when we're looking at post-zygotic. Okay. The deed is done. Romeo and Juliet did their thing. Doesn't matter. I can't go back. So what we're looking at then is what are the different types of disadvantages, okay, that can accumulate from this situation. Okay, so from ignoring all of the different pre-zygotic isolations. Whew. Any questions about any of the 8 now of these that we've gone through, either pre or post? Yeah, I just wish it would work when I wanted it to. Yep, yep. That's what I want. I have no idea where this is. This new little thing. Listen. Oh, for Pete's sake, I had it already. This is fine. All right. That was way too much time to get what was already sitting at the top, so somewhat embarrassing. So we haven't done a Menti in a while, so let's go ahead and do a Menti. Should be a good way to sum up all the different types of isolations that we talked about. So remember, you're going to go to menti.com, or if you have the app, Live Your Best Life. Right, and then we have the code you're going to pop in. So our code is 91, 73, 84, and 0. Okay, so we have a little bit of a scenario here. So without going back through your notes, think about the 8 different options that we have. Which one is going to keep our Romeo and Juliet described here apart most successfully?
Separated by twilight means separated by like time of day. Yeah, I think.
Twilight is dusk.
Okay, so I was thinking of like.
I'm literally thinking of Twilight. I'm like, no, that's not what we want. Vampires do this thing.
Oh. Am I thinking about the Twilight Wall from like Twilight Princess from Zelda? Like, are we going?
I like the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone. Whew. All right, good. So we have a couple and they're separated by twilight, as our somewhat chaotic conversation up front here indicated. All right, twilight is a time of day. All right, so this indicates that you probably have one part of the couple up during the day and one during night. So this would be pre-zygotic, temporal. Good. All right. Shoot. Shoot. Okay, so the last thing we want to talk about in here is do a little bit of ecology and wrap that up in what's called zoogeography. In other words, we kind of want to talk about this sistered idea of, now that we understand kind of generally what a species is, want to take this idea of how can we think about ecology, right, or this environmental idea, and look at where does that, or how does that tell us where we might find, or what habitat we might find some of these species in. So we can get kind of an idea of how these two things are associated together, right? Animals or species and their environment. Okay, so ecology, and we probably haven't talked about this much. We barely got to touch on this in Bio 130 in the cicada lab, if you took that with me. So very, very lightly. When we're talking about ecology, remember, we're looking at the interaction between two major components, right? The biotic portion of the environment and the abiotic portion of the environment. Okay, so my pictures are gone. Rude. Okay, for the biotic portion, wonder where that is, of the environment. Okay, just have all these great pictures in here.
They're in my head.
Okay, you guys have them. At least there's that. Right, so remember when we're thinking, I'll just leave this one up for a long time, but if you guys have all the pictures, at least you can do it that way. Remember biotic, right, this is our living interactions, right? So we can look at what organisms are living and how are they interacting with one another. Okay, so this is not an entirely inclusive list, okay? This is likely some of the ones that you've heard of or experienced or saw in David Attenborough, okay? If you unwind like me at all on the weekends. All right, so, okay, if I'm looking at competition, right, that's where we have two organisms that are going to have negative impacts on each other, right? If I'm a squirrel running around looking for nuts, I'm a chipmunk running around looking for nuts. Okay, as the squirrel, my life would be significantly easier if that chipmunk did not exist, right? Or as the chipmunk, my life would be significantly easier if that squirrel did not exist, right? Having a competitor makes your life harder, right? They're taking away food, they're being aggressive towards you, they're taking territory, they're taking mates. Okay, all in all, making your life tough. Okay? As we look at our next three boxes, these are fundamentally kind of all the same thing. Okay? Just depends on your viewpoint. In this case, we have one organism who is very happy. That is the worst plus sign that has ever been drawn in the history. And one organism that's probably not as happy. All right, so here we have a relationship where someone is receiving nutrition. That's the happy animal, right? Okay. So if we're looking at predation, okay, that's the predator chasing you down, doing the eating, right? The lion eating the gazelle. In herbivory, the same thing, right? We just have a little bit of mammal bias, right? So the vicious rabbit chasing down the plant. From the plant's perspective, that's not great, okay? Same thing from parasitism and parasitoidism, okay? The tapeworm, right? Stealing the nutrients from you. Right, all of that side of the organisms are consuming nutrients from another organism, and they are benefiting from that happily. So that's the positive. The negative, the other organism, said organism being consumed, right? So for predation, that would be our, what I say, gazelle. I really should write these down as I just wing this, okay? For herbivory, okay, that's our poor lettuce plant, crying out in pain. Okay. For parasitism or parasitoidism, okay, whatever is being eaten. Okay, so for our tapeworm example, that's us. Okay, suffering a negative benefit. Gracious. Right, so in our case, right, we're getting our nutrients taken from our digestive tract, whatever the case here is, right? Suffering some negative effect. Sometimes it's death. Okay, sometimes it's loss of some tissue, loss of nutrients, whatever it is, okay, some negative effect, okay, that we wish that other organism wasn't around for. Okay, that gazelle definitely wishes it, right? It'd be alive still. Okay, as we look at mutualism, look, I can draw plus signs this time. And those are two positive interactions, right? So everybody wins. Okay, I'm an aphid. I give sugar water to my ant protectors. I will feed you. Okay? My ant protectors are now going to serve as an army, right, and defend me from any invaders that come by up on my plant stem. Rawr. Right, so I'm paying some army off. That's a mutualism. Right, we both get some kind of benefit. The ants are getting food, I'm getting protection. Right, not so bad.
That's also us with the gut bacteria.
Also could be us with the gut bacteria, right? We're providing the gut bacteria a safe home and some nutrients. Okay, the gut bacteria are protecting us from bad bacteria, are breaking down foods we wouldn't normally be able to break down. And lastly, commensalism. Okay, so this one's probably the most unusual. So here we have an organism that's benefiting from a relationship. So we might imagine something like a remora, right, taking a ride on the underside of like a very large shark, right? Remora's getting a big benefit there. Right? It's like a taxi service. Swimming is exhausting, particularly long distances, so now I don't have to put in that effort. Okay? But the shark is getting nothing. It's not being hurt, right? The remora is little. It's not taking away flesh. It's not hurting it in any way. Okay, but it's also not helping. It's not removing parasites or any of that kind of business. It's just sort of like secretly along for the ride for a short period of time, and that will detach quietly, and it was like it was never there, right? So this is what commensalism is. Whatever the other individual is, right, is indifferent to a tag-along friend.
Can you imagine the person like brave enough to do that?
All right, so these are all living interactions, right? Everybody we talked about here was alive. When we talk about abiotic, right, this is non-living, right? Literally without life. Now, what we want to remember, can't spell, is this doesn't mean dead, right? This isn't a fallen tree that's decaying or any of that sort of stuff. This is stuff that was never alive. Okay, contains no DNA. That's a good way to kind of think about it. So what I have listed here on the right-hand side, right, is certainly not a complete list. Right? It's just a good set of examples, or what are some things in the environment that we could consider abiotic, right? Some things that interact with or affect our organisms that were never living, right? So things like light and water, for example, just take the top two. Okay, so we can imagine, for example, how much light or water peeks around or is available to organisms can certainly affect them. Right, how much they grow, how much time that they get to spend hunting. Okay, how warm they are. Okay, if they get enough to drink. So all of these things certainly matter. Okay, but they're not alive, right? Never were alive. So it's the relationship of these two things together that create a very complicated place in the world for our organisms. Any questions about either of these two things? Hopefully they sound at least a little bit familiar. Okay. So what we want to do with this is think about how does this make collectively an organism's place in the world? And we call that organism's place in the world a niche. So if we take everything that we just talked about, the collection of the biotic and the abiotic together, this is what creates an organism's niche. Okay, so we can think about like the squirrels on campus. Okay, what would their niche be? Right? What food is it they need to survive? What temperatures do they like? How much water? How much light? Okay, what habitat do they use, right? Some of that's going to be soil and trees. Some of it's going to be the buildings around here that we've constructed, right? And for organisms like that, right, some of the materials will be natural, but they hang out with us so much, right? Some of them are also going to be man-made. And that's common. And so in the end, right, you get this big pool of stuff, right? This is an organism's life. These are all of the things that it needs to subsist in the world. This makes happy, fat, well, kind of mean squirrels, right? That chase you a little bit for your French fries. Okay, so this is what we mean when we're talking about niche. Okay, the conglomerate of all of those things. Now, niche ultimately can get broken down into two sized things, what we call realized and fundamental. Okay, a fundamental niche would be super happy, I always get everything that I want niche. Okay, this is the Kim Kardashian. Okay, so if we think about this from a human standpoint, what does a human want? What can I do? Okay, I could take up a huge house, fill it with 80, it's more like Enya, right? Fill it with 80 cats, 1 million servants, not do anything, live my best life, and have really weird sinks that don't seem to have drains. If you guys have not seen this, there's videos about this. It's very weird. It seems to me that like the bigger the house these celebrities have, like the weirder the sinks that they have. It's a whole thing. I think it's a competition. Seriously, Google Kim Kardashian sinks.
They're really cool, actually.
No, they're cool, Dr. Arnett.
But I'm going to pay what you pay for things that look like a pool.
Well, you guys can be the deal breaker. Everyone can Google these after class and deal break whether you think they're cool like Maria or weird like me.
They're interesting.
I'm going to put up a survey after. Okay, so we all can imagine the insanity of generally celebrity homes, though, right? Large, more rooms than we could ever possibly use. Okay, lots of food, personal chefs. I could actually get in on that one, though. Okay, the realized niche is the one most organisms are kind of forced into, right? After you're competing with that mean old chipmunk, right? And then there's a whole bunch of predators around causing you to hide. And then there's a drought, so there's some food shortage. So then you end up in this little box and say, well, what is really the amount of space you absolutely 100% need to take up? So this is our dorms, right? Turns out we can put you in a little box with a shower and beds that look vaguely prison-like, and you're okay, right? You can live in that and eat and sleep, and humans can subsist like this. Right? And it still resembles the same concept. It's very house-like with beds and food and all of that sort of business. But it doesn't have any of the grandeur of the original vision, right? It's shrunken. Okay, so this is what we mean by realized niche. What is the smallest version of the original habitat and environment that we asked for that you could still live in? Say again? That's a good way to think about it, sure. So idealistic being sort of the fundamental, and realistic being much like the realized. Anyone gotten their phone's facial recognition to work with the masks? That's one thing that definitely frustrates me. It's like one of those very first world problem kind of things, but all right, great conversations today, everyone. We will finish up, I think we have like a handful, like 2 or 3 slides still on ecology, and then we'll start life in the water on Monday.
Professor, I wanted to tell you that the flashcards for the origins in some of them are not working. Like when you click like to do the quiz thing. Yeah. I think it's the origins one. I think that's the one that is giving me problems. The other ones I haven't even been started. Fine.
Sure, I will honestly have Fallon look at it, but I will get it looked at. We do love Fallon. I'm gonna cry so hard when she graduates.
She's graduating now, right?
I don't think so. I think she's got another semester in her. I'm so lucky. Jasmine too. I've got them both at least another semester. All right, back rows. When you have finished, you are welcome to go. Please have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the snow while it lasts. I still had some at my house this morning.
It's a little bit, but it's supposed to be like 40-some degrees tomorrow.
I'm happy with that.
Ooh, more snow.
More snow.
We love snow. 5 years I've been here now. This is the most snow I think I've ever seen here.
I mean, they said that the Arctics are melting and that we can predict to have more snow from now on, but we'll see.
Everyone else, you are welcome to go. Please have a fabulous weekend and take care of yourselves. It's not.
I'm trying to get a biology research summer program.
So the end briefing you sent me yesterday? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you would be willing to write me a letter of recommendation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Did you want me to go ahead and move now, or?
Say again?
Did you want me to move it down here and move?
So the thing you sent me actually did not request you to move. Okay. So this is something that you should. Hang on.
Wait, I sent you something?